I'm Dane Rose, and in this video I want to introduce a paradigm of truth. And in the broadest sense, it's a continuum of truth, from less true to more true to bigger truth to yet bigger truth, in an infinite continuum where the larger truth contains the smaller truth, but the smaller truth does not contain all of the larger truth. So the reason this is useful and important to me is a couple of things. One is, growing up as a spiritual seeker, I've found myself clinging to certain truths and finding them at odds with other truths and feeling a bit lost. And I wanted to create and kind of explore a paradigm that includes that experience. Another thing is, as I speak more, it's important to, for me, interrupt the tendency we have as often insecure human beings to place confidence in another's truth rather than our own. I don't want anyone to buy into something that I'm saying as a substitute or as an absolute, because I don't see it that way. The way that I see it is 85% of the time, when I or someone else acts on something that I've shared, things get better. And so 85% of the time is a pretty good bet. If you've got 50-50 on the one hand, and you can up it to 85 or 90%, things getting better, that's a useful framework. So let's look at a couple of different slices of truth. Well, Plato suggested that the ultimate human values were beauty, truth, and goodness, and that these formed a triumvirate, that there were really different facets of the same energy, that truth was the most beautiful and good thing that there was, that within beauty there was truth. So truth was beautiful, and within beauty was truth. That beauty was good, and beauty was true. So this triangle of ideals were in some ways like lighthouses as guides, that if one sought to pursue a life, a meaning, a paradigm of beauty, truth, and goodness, that this lighthouse would take us out of familiar terrain in a positive direction. It would lead to kind of never-ending change, but a change that leads towards a future of more grace, of more well-being. So this is a slice of truth. Now, another very big component of truth is a paradigm. So a paradigm is a frame within which we look to make sense of reality. And the Platonic paradigm of beauty, truth, and goodness is simply that, a paradigm. We see certain things. When you set up a frame, like a window in a blank wall, what you see is that which is visible through that particular window. Now, one paradigm of possibility is that all things are possible. Another paradigm is that reality is bigger than human consciousness. That by definition, because human consciousness is within reality, reality is bigger than something that is within it. And so not only are all things possible, but many of the things that are possible are not possible for human consciousness to conceive and comprehend. And this leads to a variety of different extrapolations. And one of them is that however beautiful, good, or true, however idyllic one imagines amidst all of those possibilities, one set of deities, those embodied ideals, deities that one might project, that the actual deities, the actual divinities are much bigger than the stepped down version capable of being imagined. And so one could take the step of saying, what is the God, goddess, all that is that I believe in? And you create the most beautiful, true, and good version of that deity, of that constellation of ideas that is possible. And then you understand it's 100 million times bigger than that. And this, of course, includes anything that you can imagine. And so why not load up the deities with positive traits? Ability to do miracles, why not? Ability to do healings, why not? Ability to flow energy that we can't possibly imagine, sure. Ability to forgive us and love us in all of our various limitations, absolutely. And 100 times more than that. So we're in this kind of concept of a paradigm. And the understanding of a paradigm is if you imagine an infinite wall and you cut a shape into part of the wall and you look out. If I look at the wall in the room that I'm in right here and look through the frame of the window, I see a certain segment of a mountain with a giant Buddha perched on top. It happens to be the landscape outside my window. So the paradigm is the window, and what it reveals is what is on the other side of that particular cutout. Now, the reason it's useful to understand a paradigm in this context is that a paradigm is never complete. Meaning, I look out of this window and I see the mountain and the Buddha, but I don't see what's on the right of it, the left of it, below it, and above it, because the window is only so big. And there's no window over here. I just see what's here. There was a window back here, but it's being obscured by this backdrop. And so a paradigm lets you see a certain slice of reality that fits within the paradigm. It never allows you to see all of reality. And this is very important when understanding the psyche, when understanding the psyche in others, the psyche in ourselves. We see ourselves through a paradigm of beliefs, of thoughts, of attitudes, of feelings. These are part of the paradigm of human perception, looking through a variety of filters at a certain slice of who we are. And that's what we see. And we don't see the parts of ourselves that are bigger than our paradigm. You don't see the parts of me that are bigger than the paradigm of this square box. It exists, You just don't see it. Now, if you're going to try and attune and honor this part out here, how do you do that if you can't see it? If you can't see the parts of me out here, and if I can't see the parts of me out here because they're outside the set, they're outside the paradigm, how do I respect and honor that which I cannot see? And the answer is you don't. Our paradigm creates a distinction that is an illusion, meaning this little box, the cutoffs of this telephone with a front-facing camera, is creating an illusionary partition between this reality and this reality. This reality out here exists. You may hear it or not, but a bunch of dogs have started barking in the neighborhood. And that's just a tiny little bit that may or may not fit into the soundscope or the soundscape, because this microphone has a limited sensitivity range, which is its paradigm. And so there are these boxes of perception that have nothing to do with reality and everything to do with the box. They're self-referential, meaning this phone has a box because this phone has a box. It's not that reality is boxed in. And our mediums of exploring reality have a box because of our mental, biological limitations, our mental, biological, emotional limitations, not because of the limitations of reality. And this is why this is so important. Carl Jung said that that which is unloved and repressed becomes hostile and regresses. Meaning, if I'm talking in this persona and I don't love this persona, and you don't love this persona, and you, that the voices within the box of our paradigm do not love a face of ourselves. This face of ourself regresses, becomes less mature, deteriorates, becomes less integrated, has less integrity with the rest of the self, and becomes hostile to those that violate its dignity, its reality, by an inadequacy, a failure, and a refusal to respect and to love that which is. That love matures, integrates, grows, like water. You can think of a plant in this respect where, imagine the stupidity for the moment of an uneducated gardener who tells a tomato plant, I don't like the fruit you've got. You produce some good fruit or I'm not going to water you. Next day comes back, fruit isn't any bigger, curses the tomato plant again. I'm not going to water you until you produce good, juicy, ripe tomatoes. And the plant withers and dies, it deteriorates. No energy is created or destroyed. It starts turning moldy, it shrivels, etc. And that's what happens to a plant that is not nourished. And every single one of us has a multifaceted gem of persona. Parts of us, distinct facets of our personality that have been created and generated to deal and respond with distinct facets in our environment. We have a work persona that was developed to survive. We all have basic human needs: survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem. We all have basic human needs. And these needs dictate that we have a survival-oriented persona within each environment. So if our environment is chauvinistic and cruel and makes, horrendous jokes about anything sensitive and feminine, we develop a tough persona, because that's the persona that survives in a brutal chauvinistic atmosphere. It's just like animals. When animals lift out of the water and become land mammals, they develop lungs. Why? Because gulls or gills won't survive. So lungs get developed to survive in an oxygen-based environment. So whether it's physically or psychologically, we're always cultivating inner personas, facets of the personality that are capable of surviving in that environment. And depending on the degree of empathy or sociopathic cruelty, on the sociopathic continuum between sociopathic environment and empathic environment, we develop personas that are correspondingly empathic or sociopathic. And what's being spoken to here is the fact that the dot and the pattern are interdependent. The individual and the family, the individual and the cult or culture are interdependent. So a sociopathic culture creates sociopathic individuals, statistically speaking, and sociopathic individuals create a sociopathic culture, statistically speaking. And there is no point on the sociopathic-empathic continuum that is absolute. So whatever it is that we consider we are today on the sociopathic-empathic continuum, there is a 10 times more empathic probability, and there is a 10 times more sociopathic probability. And that will always be there as a continuum. And this brings up another kind of aspect of truth, which is that truth exists on a continuum, like so many other things, that there is no absolute truth, that it is like rings in a tree. It's like rings in a tree that are bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And if a tree is 2,000 years old, the 2,000th ring includes all the other rings inside. But if a tree is 1 year old, it has the possibility field, if it's a sequoia, of being 2,000 years old, but it hasn't realized that possibility. And so in one paradigm of looking at human lifetimes, we start off as a 1-year-old, but we have a probability field around us. And as we navigate through our lives year by year in the spiral dance with time, we will embrace more and more of our potential that already exists as a possibility field and a probability field at birth, but which hasn't yet been explored by the lens of the conscious mind, which one could make an analogy of the laser on a compact disc player or a DVD player, that the whole DVD is there, but the laser is going around and around helping us watch the movie in linear sequence, but that the ending of the movie is there. And while in DVDs and compact discs, the future is fixed, that within the dynamic of the interactive nature of consciousness, that the future and which of the probability fields and which of the versions of the end of our movie we watch is more mutable. That if we start investing at age 10, suddenly the probability of having more money at retirement goes up. And if we go into debt with $200,000 of student loans in our teens and 20s, that the probability of being wealthy in our particular time and culture goes down because of the way that student loans follow people around and garner wages and things of that nature. Now, this frame dynamic of the paradigm is very important to understand, because that which is outside of the frame of the paradigm is invisible to the consciousness viewing itself within itself. And to just look at that paradigm for a little bit, we all kind of understand the way that cells within the human body are a part of the whole body, and that there's a system of blood and oxygen and eating and shitting and drinking and peeing and stuff that flows energy through this particular matrix. And that the cell is dependent on the body, and the body is dependent on the cell. Now, as we step that system paradigm up to the human individual in context with its larger ecology, with our larger ecology, we've somewhat created some very odd paradigms that seem to separate us from other human beings as well as most of our ecology. And so when we pour oil on the ground to get rid of used motor oil, we don't feel that that's a part of us somehow. When we cut down a rainforest and increase the volatility of temperature change, which in turn increases the volatility of wind speed, which in turn increases the amount of hurricanes and storms. Again, we don't feel like this is our body that we're affecting. And this is rather interesting, because the you and me that's right here, that has within its very truncated paradigm, this illusion of independence, the same illusion that says that this video exists independently of the room. But of course it doesn't. If the downstairs floor didn't have the ceiling that creates this floor, that then a tripod could sit on, that this little truncated box could rest on, this little truncated box wouldn't exist, because we don't float in midair. So there's a tremendous amount of interconnectedness between what fits within our paradigm and what supports the paradigm that doesn't fit in the paradigm. And while we pretend within our little Western box that we're independent individuals, the truth of the matter is, I've taken hundreds of breaths. That is the shit of trees. My lungs depend on the exhalation, on the waste or the energy expended from trees. And if I don't get that lifeline, just like a cell in my body doesn't get the lifeline of blood, bringing oxygen into every cell constantly, pulling toxins away from the cell and evacuating that through the body, that feeds the trees that feed me, I don't exist. I have about 5 minutes of existence. Meaning, if the trees stop exhaling because they're cut down, because nature decides to change one of its core habits of trees exhaling oxygen, I die, and so do you. And so we're not really that disconnected, are we? And what about drinking? Where does that come from? And any other, and then we think, well, we're independent of other human beings, and we're an isolated moment in time. But what about this shirt? Where did it come from? How many millions of people participated in the textile and transportation industry over the last 500 years to make this a reality, a concept called a blue shirt that arrives with buy with one click? How did that happen if it were not for the collaboration of millions of lives outside this box? And so what I'm referring to is the fact that while we need a paradigm that allows us to navigate within the level of consciousness that we have, which is quite limited, meaning our sense of reality and who we are is incredibly limited. The reality of who we are, how is it exactly that I'm not part of the trees if I don't exist without them? How is it that I'm not part of my parents if I don't exist without them? How is it that I'm not a part of my great-great-great-grandparents if my parents didn't exist without them? And so you get the idea of how fragile the illusion of an isolated particle or an isolated individual is in a multiverse that is interconnected on so many dimensions of time, space, heat, warmth, breath in and out, cycles. If the sun decided to just stop or explode one day, how exactly am I not connected to the sun if that means the end of life on Earth? And so there's incredible amount of interconnectedness. But the point is that a paradigm is an incomplete version of reality that lets us see a slice of reality at a level that we are capable of interacting with. And when one understands that, the more paradigms you have, the better. Why? Well, they're like windows. So why not have a window over here? Why not add a window here? Why not add a window here? And of course, when you look out at different windows, you see different parts of truth. You see different parts of reality. You look out of the Buddhist window, you see this section of reality. And this section of truth. You look out of the Muslim window, you see another section of truth, another section of reality. You look out of the beliefs of your parents, and reality looks like this. You look out of your own beliefs, and it looks like this. You look at the reality on a Thursday, and it looks like this. But on a Monday, it's changed to look like this. So, time is a paradigm. Space is a paradigm. Time and space are paradigms. Religions are paradigms. Beliefs are paradigms. They're all frames through which one can perceive a certain pattern of reality. They are not the totality of reality. So from that perspective, the more paradigms, the better, as long as you can keep them distinct. And so one naturally comes into the profound limitation called either or truth. You're with us or you're against us. This was one of President Bush's thing in the Iraq War. You're with us or you're against us. You can't be with us in this way or with us in that way or with us in this other way. No. So you have the limitation of a paradigm, and you have a meta-paradigm, basically. In the meta-paradigm, you have a whole set of paradigms that are either or. It's this or it is this, and you have to choose. And so this is someone coming into your house, and you've got windows out on the east, and you've got windows out on the west, and you've got windows on the north and windows on the south. And naturally, you see different things out of each window. But a reductionist mindset of paradigms says, no, you've got to decide which window is the true window. And so you make up your mind, you're with me or against me. I'm on the south window, I'm over here, right? Now, all these other windows, bullshit. Get rid of them. I'm on the south, and you're either with me or you're against me. And if you have two or three windows, you're crazy. You're crazy. And in an either-or paradigm, multiple simultaneous windows look crazy because, I mean, it would be like trying to converge 5 television channels onto one channel. And this is the default paradigm of an either-or paradigm, is there's only one truth. There's only one truth. And this is where you have the limitations of a Christianity versus a Buddhism. In Buddhism, they have no trouble looking out of the Christian window, the Buddhist window, the Islamic window, the Hindu windows, because Buddha isn't teaching either-or thinking. He's teaching by diversity and perspective. But for a Christian, where there's only one God, then if you spend some time bowing to Ganesh or something like, oh my goodness, you know, that's sacrilege because you've betrayed the one God. You know, the one, it was, you know, Jesus, and now you've betrayed them. You betrayed them to look at them. You betrayed this window when you looked out of this other window. And they can't both be true. Out of my west window, I see an oak tree, and out of there I see a mountainside with a big Buddha. Which one is the truth? They can't both be true. But of course, if you allow, for example, rather than streaming 5 TV channels or Netflixes on one screen and getting all confused because, you know, the 5 different plots are all going there, it's like crazy. Just tell me one. Which one do I pick? If you instead just have 5 different televisions and in different rooms, and you walk into this room and, well, and you might pick one to hang out with for a bit, but you might go into another one. Well, then it makes perfect sense. And strangely, we have a more sophisticated version of media consumption because no one thinks you're crazy if this is going on your iPad and this is on your Note phone and this one's on the TV in the kitchen and this one. We say, oh, of course, you know, there's multiple channels. They're all real. It's just which one do you want to watch? And so, and if you know, and you can, of course, have the freedom of your imagination to go way beyond the limits of just what happens to be on TV at the moment, which are the limits of what the executives could imagine could be profitable. That's what's on TV, is what executives could imagine could be profitable. The Harry Potter books were rejected by, I think, well over 100 publishers as not profitable. Not that they weren't good. People read them as like, oh, this is a great story, but it won't make any money. So they threw it out, and they threw it out, and they threw it out. And then one publisher, and the same happened with Lord of the Rings. In fact, the publisher of the Lord of the Rings, it was the son of, I think it was Unwin Press in England at the time. The son wrote to his father, the owner of the publisher, and said, Dad, this book will lose money for sure, The Lord of the Rings. We'll lose money for sure, but it is a work of literature worth publishing. So if you wouldn't mind publishing a money loser, I think it would be a contribution to the literary environment. And they said, okay, fine. Don't lose more than this amount of money, but go ahead. And of course, it turned out to be one of the great bestsellers. But what's on our media kind of menu, for the most part, are what executives have decided will or will not lose money. And of course, the Harry Potter knockoffs are rampant in our world right now, because it went from 99% of publishers thinking it was a money loser to everyone realizing they were wrong. And so that's what we have in our paradigms of our little boxes and stuff, is what a certain group of people think will make money. And of course, our imagination of what we want to watch is way more direct and interesting and diverse. And couldn't they do this with this show and combine it with that and this? So we can have our own shows in our mind. And as long as we realize the distinction between the show in our mind and the show on TV and the outer world, people don't think that we're crazy. If we lose that distinction, people get very worried because we lack a sophisticated knowledge and skill set of navigating paradigms. And so we shove all kinds of highly synesthetic and creative people into lunatic asylums because we don't know what else to do with them, and we don't have the skill to grapple with their reality within a wide enough paradigm set to be able to make the distinctions necessary for the multiple different versions and lenses of reality to start having cohesive, distinct narratives that add richness and diversity to our understanding of reality rather than threatening and overwhelming us. And so, this is just one of the consequences of having a rather weak relationship with truth. But the key thing to understand with the paradigm is it is incomplete. And if we do vaguely understand the interconnectedness of all aspects of reality, then we could say that the human ego is a zoomed-in lens of a certain part of the larger body called the ecology that supports the human ego. Meaning, if you cannot isolate a human ego from its parentage, from its species, from the planet on multiple different dimensions through time, and on the liquid level, on the food level, on the breath level, on the atmospheric level, if you understand that a gravitational change in Alpha Centauri of 45% tomorrow means the death of you and I tomorrow. Because the gravitational constant is constant throughout the universe. So if it changes on Alpha Centauri as a constant, if that formula changes there, it changes everywhere in the universe. And our bodies aren't designed for a 45% instant change, so we die. We're that interconnected to where these tiny little habits of planetary life anywhere in the universe, they change here as well. And if water anywhere in the universe changes its properties, so that now water has a different property, it doesn't flow, for example, suddenly all our blood stops. I mean, we're that interconnected, but we don't see it within our limited paradigms. Well, here's the problem with a limited paradigm or a limited awareness of our relationship with everything else. The problem is that what we don't see, we don't respect. Respect. To see. Spect. spectacles, to see again, to respect. We don't see and we don't respect what's outside the box. And what we don't see and respect, we don't honor. To honor is to be changed by what we see. If I see you, I honor you by smiling, by saying hello, by remembering some of the context about you. That's how I honor you. I am changed. If I see you driving on the highway, I make sure that I don't hit you. That's honor. I see you and I act, I change my behavior to honor you and respect you, and in doing so I avoid violation. I don't crash into your car. I don't pretend you don't exist, which is a violation of courtesy and empathy. I don't violate. I don't commit violence on what I see. However, I do violate, and I do dishonor, and I do disrespect that which I do not see. So here we have the imperative connection between the paradigm and the amount of suffering we participate in and co-create by what we do and do not honor, by what we do and do not see. Understanding this, we can understand that the high levels of mental, emotional, and physical suffering that we are creating is in direct correlation between the parts of ourselves, the part of the larger body of a species, of a planet, of other species, and of ourselves that we do not honor, respect, and in consequence violate, and in consequence create pain. Because if love is attunement with competency to create abundance and success, then pain is a symptom of the absence of love. It is a symptom of violation, deterioration, dishonor, disrespect. And so the bigger the paradigm, the more of the picture we see, the less violation we participate in. And of course, the violation we participate in is unconscious because the paradigm that we're using to assess violation is limited. So we're not violating within our paradigm for the most part. Some of us are, and breaking the laws that we know, breaking the agreements that we know, breaking the various rules of road and this and that we know, and we're hitting people and all that. And we're drinking ourselves to death and stuff. So we are violating within the known paradigm. But most of the violation takes place in, for example, dishonoring personas that have never been allowed to be born, or dishonoring personas that have no place within the value hierarchy of the cult in which we operate. And so the paradigm and the limits of the paradigm are important markers between the probability of honoring and loving some part of ourselves and it growing, and failing to love some part of ourselves and it regressing and becoming hostile towards us, creating the illusion of an enemy. Because if my paradigm was so limited, and you can limit the paradigm, for example, if a surgeon cuts off all nerve awareness of your arm, suddenly this is just an interesting toy. You can poke it, you can do this, all kinds of things. It doesn't feel like it's you. But then the nerves come back and you feel incredible amounts of pain and stop that, and and it's unbearable. And so similar when you got Novocaine in your teeth, you bite your cheek and you wake, pain comes off and you've chewed into your cheek. It feels terrible. And so the unconsciousness of what is outside the paradigm is our biggest danger to our own survival and the survival and well-being of those other parts of us that we are interconnected with. So if we understand that the human brain is incapable of holding a paradigm that is big enough to encompass all of reality, then we understand that suffering and violation is innate to human consciousness because we can only honor and respect that which we see and understand. And we lack the ability to see and understand everything that is connected to us. And in the drama and tragedy and stuff of our lives and in art, this is so often the story, where the very thing that someone wants most and is pursuing with their right hand is being destroyed and consumed with their left hand. But they're not talking to one another. And, in government, the government is busily trying to create democracy over here while the CIA is bribing, drug trafficking, human trafficking, blackmailing, etc., and destroying democracy. I mean, what's going on there? Well, they're not talking to each other, are they? The whole idea of secrets and partitions, so that the public that pays for action doesn't know what the action is, creates these bizarre schizophrenic conversations within the larger cultural system, which is a magnification of the consciousness of the individuals of those cultures. You don't get a government that has nothing to do with the individuals in the country that elected and participate in the government. The government is a fractal magnification of the human ego of the people in that government. And all the factions within our personality are represented in all the factions, dysfunctional and functional, in our government. And in many ways, you could say the purpose of cult or culture is to provide a zoom-in lens that will allow us to objectively see the relationships within that culture and how those might step down to semi-vague, conscious relationships within our own persona, within the personalities or the sub-personalities we've developed to interact in work, in romance, in driving to work, and climbing trees, and going for hikes, and trying to look cool, and whatever. We have these different personas that are attuned to what is rewarded, meaning what helps us meet our human needs in these different areas. Now, if we understand this, we understand that a certain amount of ourselves and a certain amount of other people that we violate through the ignorance and unconsciousness of our personas will regress and hate us for excluding them from the paradigm. In the mythological tale of Sleeping Beauty, one of the relatives is not invited. She's outside of the paradigm. She goes uninvited. She is excluded. Everything which is excluded from our paradigm is dishonored, is disrespected, and curses us as we curse it. It is you don't have a one-way violation. All violation is mutual. You punch someone and your fist hurts. Now, admittedly, in dynamics of mass and stuff, someone may be feeling more pain than the other. You may wear a glove and etc. But all violation is mutual. So when you exclude a certain part of yourself from the conversation of making a decision or from the birth of a new project, that part of you which wasn't consulted about the marriage, above the job choice, rebels and sabotages that which excludes it, for the very obvious reason that the problem is the exclusion. The problem is not that an old fairy exists in this particular Sleeping Beauty narrative. The problem is she's not invited to the christening. And the way a dumbed-down version of the story is told, she's, of course, the bad one. And we always like to say that whatever is outside our particular box is the bad thing, in part because we're frightened of the unknown, in part because we're a traumatized cult. And trauma always comes from the unknown, meaning that which we dishonor, disrespect, and violate, in turn violates us as an inevitable response, as part of the alchemy of violation. And we like to label it as bad rather than understand the complexity of the dynamic. And so, just like with any part of your family system, when a certain part of your family system and pattern is taboo and silenced with secrecy, that secrecy will put the individuals in that family system to sleep with the curse of violation. And so that's told in the narrative of Sleeping Beauty, where, the uninvited guest, by being excluded and violated, by not being acknowledged, puts to sleep that which is being born. And this is a parable for what happens if you're deeply in love, but your mind says love doesn't matter, career matters, because your cult paradigm says that. So you take the job that advances your career and destroys the love of your life. You have dishonored and violated the persona that had an equal claim at the table of decisions. And so that persona will curse you with depression, with exhaustion, with sadness, as you have cursed it by being excluded from the table of your life, what's in the set or what's in the paradigm. So that which is outside the paradigm is the shadow, is the rebel, is the self-sabotage, is the deteriorating expression of violation. And as we move into a ranking of truths, this becomes, more relevant. So what is a ranking of truth or a ranking of truth paradigm? Because within so many different windows, most of us can't keep track of what it looks like out this window and this window. It's too much to think, right? Particularly when it's highly discouraged by everyone around us. But to the degree that we're going to pick a paradigm as the paradigm, the main window we look out of, which window do we pick? And so one is kind of as a ranking system. And this ranking system, by the way, of course, exists within a paradigm that I've created. Does it allow for anomalous data or deny it? Is it flexible or rigid? So this is really key, because this gets into the question of an either or a static paradigm. Everything that's static dies, is permanently limited and dies. You put an oak tree in a little pot and it starts growing, and if the pot isn't expanding and the oak tree isn't transplanted, then the pot that nurtured the oak tree at one time kills the oak tree as it matures. So does it allow for anomalous data? Now this is key, because every paradigm will be presented with anomalous data. Why? Because no paradigm is big enough to entertain the entirety of reality. So when anomalous data taps at the door of your paradigm and says, wait a minute, if poor people are evil and bad and deserve to be punished, why is the nicest person I know poor? Or if rich people are jerks, what's this rich person doing donating to charity? Well, of course, it's a simple paradigm. You can't make a paradigm that stupid in terms of that dull and ignorant in its absolutes. You're going to have tons of anomalous data. But the real question is the response. Because if you understand that no paradigm is capable of holding the truth of reality and the truth of ourselves, inner or outer, then anomalous data is a certainty. And the question is, do you expand your paradigm when you encounter anomalous data? Or do you banish, dishonor, and disrespect the truth within anomalous data and position yourself to be cursed by that which you deny? Number two, does it include other truths? So does it exclude other truths, or does it include? And here we get to the paradigm of the rings of the tree, because the 2,000-year-old version of the tree includes the 1-year version of the tree, but the 1-year version of the tree doesn't include the 2,000. And so when considering the value of a given truth as a technology of perception, not as reality, because truth is not reality, it is a technology of perception. Does the truth that you're picking include and have room for other truths? If it does, it is superior to truths that are smaller, that exclude others. So by this metric, Buddhism would be a superior technology of perception relative to Christianity, because Buddhism allows for all the truths of Christianity to exist in parallel and with it, but Christianity does not allow for the parallel and truths of Buddhism. In fact, it calls it blasphemy. And so you would say that Buddhism is if you're a scientist seeking to perceive reality through the lens of paradigm, you would pick a paradigm that had more versatility. It's a microscope with 5 or 6 different lenses rather than just one lens. Thirdly, how complex is the paradigm? This is critical, because if you understand that reality is infinitely complex with infinite distinctions, if you think of the color wheel alone, for example, computers on their chips will refract the color spectrum to 256 million different distinct colors. But we can't think of even 50 distinct colors. I mean, give us a break, so it's like yellow, red, just keep it simple for us, not because reality is simple, because we're simple, because we're a tiny part of reality. So how complex is the paradigm? Meaning the paradigm is more and more accurate the more complex it is. Now, one important aspect of complexity in paradigm is paradox. Does your paradigm, the one that you're going to pick, embrace more or less paradox? And you can think of this like, is up good? Well, if you're down and you want to go upstairs, it's good. But if your paradigm doesn't also say that down is good, then when you come to go downstairs, you're bad. But what if the washing machine is downstairs? It's like, now this is very absurd, and obviously we would want a paradoxical paradigm for navigation. We don't want to be told that only going right is good and try and GPS to our destination only turning right without turning left or driving straight. I mean, we understand the absurdity of that. But when it comes to the metaphysical truths, we are stuck, many of us, in boxes that absurd. You can only feel positive feelings. Negative feelings are bad. Always look on the bright side. Don't dwell on the negative. You know, how paradoxical is your paradigm? Does it have full spectrum navigation where every direction and every possibility is appropriate in some moment, in some situation, etc.? Or you are limited in your consciousness mobility. 4, does it have a place for rebellion, challenge, and the critic? Now remember, every incomplete paradigm boxes out, dishonors, and curses the parts of ourselves that are outside of the paradigm, which in turn rebound and curse us with suffering and all kinds of stress and things like that. And there's a very good reason for the rebellion, for the critic, for the challenge. These are parts of ourselves knocking on the door. Bang, 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 bang. I'm out here. Come on. Come out here. Expand your version of reality. Get bigger. Travel the world, you fucked up, myopic American, bigot. Learn about other things. This is the voice of the parts of ourselves that have been cursed by the stonewalling, by the rejection of the anomalous data. And it is an invitation to life, to breathe, to live, to be deeper in the mystery of the interconnectedness with ourselves and all that is. So if you have to pick between a paradigm that is threatened and that attacks that which criticizes it, and that which invites the critic. You see, the smarter you become, the more you realize you don't know anything. And the more you realize you don't know anything, the tinier your little bit of useful knowledge is in the vastness and the totality of all there is in the whole timescape and probability field. Now, you welcome criticism when you understand how ignorant you are, because every part has a voice. But you welcome criticism of a particular kind. There's 2 kinds of criticism around a paradigm, and there's 2 types of rebellion around a paradigm. One is a collapsing criticism. It is a criticism that is against change, that is against complexity, that is against difference. This is the voice of the traumatized, wounded persona that is frightened of the unknown because the unknown is bigger than the known. The unknown is 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 times bigger than the known. So the known is dwarfed in the presence of the unknown. And a fear-based individual that is afraid of itself because it violates so much of itself will try and get smaller and smaller. We don't want foreigners around here. What are you doing? Why are you dressing in women's clothing? You have a penis. Get back in line. We'll stone you to death if you don't do what you're told. Keep the foreigners away from here. So you have this voice, which is the fear-based, traumatized, regressed child in each one of us that has been brutalized by our cult. This is not a critic to listen to because it shrinks the paradigm. It doesn't embrace diversity and truth. However, every paradigm, no matter how expansive and blah, 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 has another kind of critic and another challenger and another rebel. And this rebel says, what about me? What about me that's outside the set here? Okay, you've got your peaceful little meditation sanctuary. Where's the shouting sanctuary? Where's the place for the me that is so enraged at being bullied and dominated for the past 500 years that does not have a place to shout? So yes, I get your silence beads, and yes, don't talk on the paths, and don't. Where's the shouting sanctuary? Fuck you, you son of a bitch, New Age bastards. Where's the place for me? The one that has something to say and is being crushed by your silence. And this is the rebel you want to listen to, because it's not saying there should be no silence. It's just saying if you're going to have a pool or a pit for silence, if you're going to have a room for meditation, let's have a room for shouting and wrestling. If you're going to have a be positive room, let's have a critical thinking room. If you're going to have workshops on deluding yourself that everything is wonderful, let's have workshops on deluding yourself that everything is miserable. Let's have more. Let's have bigger and more variety, etc. Now, this is a voice of expansion, because the rebel is the one saying, no, fuck you, I'm not going to be excluded because of the stupidity and limits of your little box. I'm out here and I'm going to say something. Now, you want to pick a paradigm and you want to follow individuals, if you're looking for leadership, that embrace the opportunity of the constructive critic, the constructive challenger and rebel, because the world will get bigger if you follow and honor that voice. If your attitude to a rebellious teenager fucked up and cooped up in some little box called education, and you try and show honor for that anger, that frustration, what is it that we're fucking up? How are we failing? Where are we hypocritical? Where don't we embrace paradox? What are we not seeing that you are seeing? You see, you strengthen the vitality of your system, and you bring more and more of yourself into the paradigm, which is moving towards healing, wholeness, integration, symmetry. Does it lead to greater awareness, greater beauty, symmetry, healing, etc.? Or does it lead to deeper polarity and violation? A very important metric. Does it suggest clear action that leads to well-being? All suffering, particularly unnecessary suffering, are expressions of asymmetry, imbalance. This is not suffering too much. If I put a 400-pound weight on this finger, it's suddenly going to suffer because it's going to get out of balance. It's going to snap. Then there's a lack of integration. There's a lack of integrity. And so to put a 400-pound weight on this finger suggests a lack of understanding, a lack of respect, a lack of care for ourselves. And pain is the result. You didn't respect a part of yourself in them or in you, etc. So now you've got pain. Now we have such myopic and traumatic-based paradigms that we are causing pain right and left beyond our capacity to understand what it is. And so does it suggest clear action towards well-being intelligently is a very clear context for a truth. Understanding that everything's true from one angle, from one perspective, through the lens of one belief, through one paradigm. It's all true. Nothing's true from another paradigm. You look out of the west window and you say, there's a mountain in the Buddha. And you look over there and you say, no, it isn't. There isn't a mountain in Buddha. There's an oak tree. No, there's a mountain in the Buddha. No, there's an oak tree. Well, There's a mountain and a Buddha, and there's an oak tree. If you can imagine it, it's there somewhere. And that's where the person's awareness is that's saying whatever they're saying. And so, does it lead to well-being? Well-being is experienced as we attune, as we go through the cycle of love. I love enough to care. I care enough to see. With seeing and care, I understand. With caring and understanding, I attune. With attunement, I honor and respect. With honor, respect, and attunement, I succeed at creating harmony and well-being and abundance. In the creation of well-being and abundance, there's a feeling of safety and gratitude and love and pleasure, etc., which leads back to love, the cycle from love to competency and back to love. So if you're behaving in a way that creates well-being, and there are different cyclical periods around this, because in a trauma-based culture, change of any kind creates terror. But without change, you have death. And so you're going to suffer one way or another in a trauma-based culture, because you're either going to have the terror of change, or you're going to have a slow and painful death because you don't change. There's nothing but suffering in a trauma-based, where you're terrified of all change and everything. So you understand it's a faulty paradigm. Does it suggest clear action towards well-being intelligently? Does it lead to more self-love, love, and dominion? Dominion is the experience in the paradigm of partnering with all of reality to create more in well-being. And so dominion is the ideal. It's not domination, which is based on separation. All domination has a paradigm where I'm separate from everything else and I'm in a battle with everything else that I'm afraid of because it's bigger than me. So first you put up the walls and say, this is me and that's everything else. Having done that, you look at everything else and you say, wow, it's a lot bigger than me. Then the paradigm of separation is a paradigm of pain. Pain, the separation from and longing for. We want to feel one with. We want to feel at home. We want to feel safe. As soon as you're separate, you don't feel one. You don't feel safe. So you've now got a painful relationship with something that's 1,000,000 times bigger than you. What do you get there? You get fear and anticipated more trauma and pain. What do you do when you're afraid? You attack, you defend. What are you punching? Yourself, your own lungs, your own body. You're in a battle with, it's the cell in relationship with the whole organism. Get this blood out of here. Don't, who said you could bring in this? Who stole my garbage? And so you have this whole dynamic of paranoia, the dissociated, paranoid Western ego in a frenzied battle with just about everything else. Every other god on the planet is a nightmare. Every other culture is, heathens and this and that and the other. The past, we are afraid of talking and dealing with our shadow in the past. We're afraid of the future. We're schizophrenic morons in profound isolation from the larger part that we're a part of. So the paradigm of dominion is the opposite. It's saying that reality is, first of all, not out to get us. It exists. And if we understand reality and learn to partner with it, we transcend the duality of this enemy dynamic. And at the deepest level, that we transcend the human ego and understand, all energy is neither created or destroyed. It just changes. And as it changes, the real thing is it changing towards grace and balance, or is it changing towards imbalance and asymmetry and toxicity? Toxicity is simply imbalance. Every single person on the planet is medicinal at a certain dose. Too much enthusiasm, toxic. Too much passivity, toxic. Too much feminine energy, toxic. Too much salt, toxic. Too much belladonna, toxic. Right amount keeps your heart alive. It's all about the dose and context rather than the absolute. And you can even look at that on the journey of life. Are you going forward or are you going backward? Well, if you're on a journey from New York to San Francisco following the mileposts, if you're at mile 27 and you go back to mile 26, you're going backwards. If you're at mile 15 and you go to mile 26, you've just made a leap forward. Same position, different direction. So you cannot even say a location. If you're going from heroin addiction to to marijuana addiction, you're going forward. If you're going from peaceful joy in the present moment to addiction of yoga, you're going backwards. And so these positions are all relative. So what's good for one person at that moment is backwards for another person, because we're all going on different journeys following a different path and at different starting points. Does it lead to more self-love, love and dominion, more competency, awareness, etc.? And what I just expressed, it could be said is, does it allow for context, individuality, and one's position? So truth is profoundly dynamic and integrally connected with beauty and goodness. It's connected with intelligence, the efficiency with which energy is transformed into human well-being. And I want to put all of this in one final series of rings, like that oak tree, and just kind of one other angle of truth. So we all come into the reality from the limitless potential of Source. There's a tremendously big probability and possibility field around every infant. They can learn any language. They can learn any number system. They can learn any political system. They can learn any cult. They can default to any set of beliefs that are present in their reality. Huge possibility system. Now, in the ignorance of dogma and the fear of the unknown, this moment in time is profoundly dishonored. It's marginalized. Let's find the cheapest daycare system we can. That's, of course, good CEOs like Marissa Myers at Yahoo should have scheduled cesarean C-sections so that they can get back to the office on time and immediately hand their baby over to someone else, so that, I'm a competent chauvinistic male like all the rest of them who puts money and business before human beings, even my own child. Aren't I advanced as a feminist? And so, we can come into any terrain, and this is it is a tremendously big, and it is a feminine state. Possibility, innocence, mutability. Infancy is a feminine state of enormous potential. And to the degree that we dishonor it, oh, that's just children, they'll grow out of it, to the degree that we dishonor the enormous possibility field of infancy, we reduce the species potential by at least 90%, because you've got the most leverage at those moments that our cult lacks the paradigm to honor with humility, with intelligence, with self-love, with the love of understanding that terrain and how significant so many moments are. The Second World War, dependent on a pathologically regressed child named Adolf Hitler. Now, of course, within chauvinism, you ignore the circle that creates the individual and you focus on the individual. So let's all hate Adolf Hitler. Well, his parents already did that. His parents hated Adolf Hitler. His culture hated Adolf Hitler. The world hated Adolf Hitler. So Hitler regressed, became a rebellion of the world that hated him and hated the world. In that sense, there's nothing wrong with Adolf Hitler that isn't wrong with the rest of the world. Because you don't get an Adolf Hitler if you have a single, highly empathic individual who lifts the shame and trauma so that he could do something far more rewarding and self-loving than trying to dominate a country, let alone a world. Being president, for example, is generally a miserable job. So it takes a pretty dysfunctional person, as a general rule, to want the job, or at least to not understand what a huge sacrifice it is to be a leader of a country. People who are in profound inferiority states from profound amounts of traumas find that they need something to validate their existence that's worth suffering that much. But it's not usually a very happy, well-adjusted person that is drawn to concentrated power, which in many ways has a corrosive influence on the well-being of all involved, which is why decentralized power is a superior paradigm on so many levels. And we're moving into that. We're developing the technology with apps, etc., to move towards decentralized power based on love and competency. And, at rates where you can manage. You cannot function as a US president today. The whole thing is a complete performance because you can't even read 1/100th. You can't read 1,000th of what you need to be reading to be up to speed to make informed decisions. So it is a complete parody to put on a performance to pretend to have clear, confident things for the news media, because that's what the people want. They want a clear, confident person, however ignorant or ill-informed. But we come in from source. We come in with this huge probability field. And we develop the technology, the beliefs, the personas, etc., to survive the family system. If we do not, we die. And if we develop the technology to survive the family system, we graduate from the family. And we graduate from the cult of the family and its system, with all of its absurdities and abuses and ignorances and violations and incompetences that are inevitable in an abuse cult that doesn't train parents even a single hour in high school and just says it's normal to pass on the abuses of the generation before. If it was good enough for my father, it's good enough for me. I'm going to beat my son. So if we graduate from the family system, we enter the cult system, the larger cult system. And here again, in an abuse cult, some people go insane, some people die slowly with addiction, some people die rapidly with suicide. Suicide has now overtaken death rates by drivers. So there are more people dying in America by suicide than there are by car accidents. But this is, of course, taboo to talk about in the greatest country, etc. So it is not talked about. And so you will die in your cult system, or you will learn to survive it. And if you've survived high school and college and whatever, you'll now go into your religious system, your spiritual paradigm, etc. And again, some people will be thrown down into shame and depression and split, schizophrenia and terror and trauma and all that by that. And some people will survive that. If you survive your family system, your cult system, your religious system, and then the economy, let's not forget that system. So the economy has hundreds of millions of people all vying to take your money and all vying to give you less money. And if you let them, they'll starve you to death in a heartbeat. And so you have the economic system. And again, if you may die, you may go insane, you may not be able to pay your medical bills, whatever, etc. But you will develop, if you survive, a strategy for surviving the economic system. So you are then surviving in all these relationships and systems. If you have survived all of these systems, you have a choice to make. You have a freedom or an opportunity. Well, if you've gone through survival and you've got security of survival, and you have some sense of love, self-love, and and belonging, and you have some sense of self-esteem, you've met a certain amount of your human needs. You now come to a point where you can decide to stay limited to the paradigms of your family, your cult, your economy, your religious systems, and feel a sense of love and belonging and survival and security within those systems with all of their various faults. Or you can transcend the system and you can create a personal set of paradigms. You can create a personal cult, a personal culture. No objectively more cult-like than the system around you. I mean, what kind of fucked up cult goes around saying, "How you doing? I'm fine," and gets mad at people for actually answering the question? Our fucked up cult, it's a cult. It doesn't make any sense. It's just what we do. And what kind of cult goes around cutting off, genitally mutilating men as a matter of course? Our cult, we just chop bits of men's penises off before they have any choice. What kind of bullshitty cult does that? I mean, and you know it's a cult if you did the opposite, like, let's just start tomorrow and see what we would think about cutting off bits of the clitoris of every woman like they do in countries in Africa. Well, we would have an outrage. Why? Because it's not because it's more absurd than cutting off bits of men's penis. It's because it's different. We get angry when we go from abusing black people to abusing white people. What's the difference? If you're going to abuse a race, why not pick on the big one rather than abuse the minority and the underdog? There's no difference. But we get outraged at the change. And so when we create our own personal cult, our own personal culture, with people close to us, etc., in that freedom. First of all, it will not be supported in general by the cult because it is a change. It's a bigger version of reality. It's like, oh my gosh, that's, and we have this wonderful catch-all umbrella to dissuade, threaten the love and belonging of anyone who goes outside the cult. We just call it weird. And what weird means is that not a lot of people do it, which is a high compliment in many cases. But we've also decided that weird is synonymous with something to be excluded. And here we threaten the human needs of the minority that's behaving anomalously, whether it's homosexuals, whether it's women who actually want to be executives, whether it's women who want to be in the military. That's weird. And therefore, meaning it's different, therefore it shouldn't exist, when of course all life requires change. And so the truth that you can create after surviving all of these different microcults that are dependent relationships. If you don't survive your family, it's not like you just press a button and get a new family. You die, or you go insane, or you numb out to such an extent you can never find yourself again. It's not like you just push a button and go to new. No, you have to survive, However, and the more dysfunctional the family, the more dysfunctional the coping mechanism. If you've got a functional family, you can be functional and survive and intelligent. If you've got, a fucked up masochistic family, you may have to kill your parents to get out of there alive. That's fucked up. Fucked up systems create fucked up coping mechanisms to survive them. But you do get this choice, if you succeed in all of that, of creating your own culture, your own personal version of the truth. Now, your version of truth is not going to encapsulate the truth any more than anyone else's. Well, I shouldn't say any more. You're not going to get the entirety. But you can add 20 windows rather than one and get 20 different views of different realities that most people pretend don't exist. And it's very easy to deny reality. I'm sitting here in this room. There's one window there. I can deny the reality behind that wall. It's easy. I don't see it, so it doesn't exist. And a scientist, a good rationalist, reductionist scientist, part of the priesthood of our cult, will have faith that it doesn't exist. I don't see it, so I have faith that it doesn't exist, because reality couldn't possibly be bigger than my eyes and my brain, and so it doesn't exist. So it's very easy, and everyone can be happy with that, and you can have windows where other people don't have windows, and thus see things that other people don't see. You see, and there's a lot of things that if you have windows 360 degrees and look around and stuff, you see a bird flying here, and then you see it coming here, and then you see it going there, and you realize there's a connection between these windows are connected somehow. And, if you watch a forest fire in Brazil, clear-cutting the forest, change the temperature spike, and then watch a wind rush catch up and head over here and mingle with this and become a typhoon in the Philippines. Oh my goodness, there's a connection between forest fires and a tornado or this or that. My goodness. And so you have a little bit more integrated sense of reality. It's never the full thing, but it's a little bit bigger. And so these metrics, I think, are decent metrics for evaluating how flexible and mutable your truth is relative to another. You'll hear everyone's version of truth all the time. And the question is, does it include all the data? If it begins by saying none of this data is real, so we're not going to even examine it, well, it's a pretty small paradigm. It can't tolerate it. It's too fragile to hold all the data. If it says we don't want to hear what women have to say, just because we know if they did say something, in fact, when they did the voting debate about suffragists in America, they said, why should we waste the paper to print ballots for women when we already know that our women would never dream of voting different than their husbands? Why would we? I mean, this is a waste of resources, because if all women are going to vote what their husbands vote, then it's just wasting ballots. And then there's longer, and they should be home with the children and not, going to polling. And so this is, it's a self-referential thing. Because of course they wouldn't ask women would anyone vote different from the husband, because that would let in a bigger reality and challenge, the system. So it's a decent set of values for examining truth. And you do need, and I'll just close by saying one thing. So we've already established that every paradigm is false in that it's not complete. that everything outside of the paradigm is going to become antagonized by the dishonor of it not being considered, that the human mind is incapable of grasping the totality of all that is, that everything is true from one perspective, from one belief. And so why even bother having a paradigm or having a truth? Well, without any structure of truth, we don't have a guidance system for moving towards something. And the way that I look at it is the circle or the sphere is kind of the ultimate geometric symbol. It is the most graceful shape, because if you want to transport something and you can put it on a car with spheres or wheels, if you can have a propeller of a jet that's circular rather than square, it's going to be vastly more efficient. And so, you want to, honor the sphere. And the sphere is this beautiful paradox because it's one and it's an infinite number of lines. It's one, it's a sphere. But a sphere, if you build it with a computer, is an infinite number of lines. No matter how many lines, it's more than that. It's got an infinite number of planes. So you have the feminine and the masculine, the roundness and the line, the one and the infinite. You have so many beautiful expressions of grace in the sphere. And so it's a model. The sphere, one could say, is the most true, the most beautiful, the most elegant shape in the universe, and it's good if you believe in intelligence, the efficiency of moving energy towards well-being. A wheel, you want a wheel, not a square. But you can't construct the sphere one is too simple. And so you try and look at all these different truths, and it's not going to be a totally complex sphere. So your little paradigm of reality is not 200 million truths. Let's say it's the 4 noble truths, right? Never tell a lie. Well, what do? Do you give Anne Frank to the Nazis so that you can never tell a lie? Or, well, I guess we wouldn't want to murder children. So there's these infinite ranges of truth. They get broken down to a heuristic model of reality that's crude, that's dumb, that's better than nothing, and that improves your life. And so you've got a square paradigm inside the sphere of truth. And that's more useful than having no idea what to do ever. Because with 4 points, you can pinpoint a lot of different directions. You can say, okay, if you've got 4 GPSs guiding you, 4 satellites guiding you in your GPS, you're going to be able to navigate within a fair amount of reality. And the only bit that's going to be really problematic is, and as you get to those right angles in your journey of life, it's going to be a bumpy ride. Bang, the square goes down. It's nothing like a wheel. It's going to be crude and difficult to go in. And you wake up, and maybe you get a little bit more sophisticated, and you cut the corners off of your square and you turn it into an octagon. Oh boy, is that better than driving in right angle wheels? And things get a lot better. And more importantly, you're excluding less of yourself, because what the gap between the sphere and the square that is within the sphere is the excluded self that is being violated, that's in pain, that's being denied, that's part of the shadow that needs to keep coming in. So you just keep developing a more and more complex and balanced version of truth, and your ride gets easier. You need a paradigm because the conscious mind is only conscious of language. You are not conscious of a single thought not nested in language. You're not conscious of a color without the word red, because it is the human consciousness has been partitioned into the language area of the brain. So without a word, without something, it doesn't exist. And so the best thing you can do is understand you've got a limited framework of truth and keep expanding it, but without losing touch of the edges. If it gets too complex, like 256 million colors, just go back to 7. But well, if you've got 7 colors, could you expand it to 20, 21? And if you work with a system intimately, it doesn't matter what it is. You work with astrology intimately. You work with mathematics intimately. You work with money and money technology intimately. You work within capitalism intimately. You work with you break down chauvinism piece by piece. You get more and more nuance and more distinction, and it's useful. And finally, understanding this, you're not going to develop the ultimate version of reality. So you can spend time with other people who see through different windows than you do and succeed as a result of what they see in a way that you can't succeed because you don't see what they see because you don't have their paradigms. And you can embrace a world where you start to realize, George Soros likes to, like any good capitalist chauvinist, pretend that it's all about math and numbers, etc. But someone close to George said, that's not how George Soros, and he's one of the billionaires who does a lot of capitalist trading, he said, that's not how George Soros makes and loses his money. He looks at all the numbers like everyone else. But every so often, George Soros gets a pain in his back. And when he gets that pain in his back, he knows he's got to get out of that trade. That trade, something's happening that he doesn't see. So he leaves the trade because of a back pain he doesn't understand. And then he makes money or avoids losing money and goes on the media. Now, in our cult, to say I'm a financial wizard because I get back pains that I don't understand is a laughingstock. Because we're reductionist, rationalist, materialist assholes who, when people say the truth like something like that, we dismiss them because we're uncomfortable with a reality that complex. So he doesn't say, I left the trade because my back went out. He said, well, the derivatives in the futures market with the U.S. interest rates combined with this. I, of course, knew that the trade, no, his back went out and he got out of the trade. He's got a window into a version of reality that lets him win, that he doesn't understand, that he's smart enough to pay attention to. And over time, he may come to understand the pattern behind the pain of his back. We all have access to certain information that we don't fully understand. And some of us are smart enough to talk about it. And some of us have friends that are intelligent enough to make room and honor the parts of us that we don't fully understand and they certainly don't understand. And others laugh it down, push it out, humiliate it, banish these truths that are our allies from the table and suffer accordingly. And I'll leave you with that. Two other distinctions I want to make in the hierarchy of truths. One is about the level of integrity of the truth, and this ties into the scientific method where most scientific theories evolve over time. Scientists finally acknowledged the reality of the germ once the microscope was discovered, because the microscope brought more information to the table. It was able to see things at a microscopic level, and the scientific theories adopted and responded to now include microscopic data. Physics expanded to include subatomic data as subatomic particles were incorporated. And so one could see science as the art of creating a hypothesis that is incomplete, but that explains relatively reliably all existing data. That new data is always being brought to the table, and as it does so, certain current truths and current scientific hypotheses are challenged by the new data. When this occurs, in the case of bad science, the new data is suppressed to pamper the ego of reputable scientists in order to maintain a status quo. But at such point, when enough data is gathered to not only challenge the existing theory, but make sense within a new and more complex theory, the theory is updated. And this process works very well because you could summarize the entire purpose of science as being to gather as much data as possible and fit it into heuristic models of anticipation, where you can accurately predict what's likely to happen here or here or here or here, and that the species' survival is enhanced with a more accurate predictive model of reality. And so science has brought enormous well-being in terms of prosperity to the species by letting us know that when we combine muriatic acid and concrete, it's not just some vague mystery of the gods and goddesses praying to see what will happen. No, that concrete always dissolves in the presence of muriatic acid. And if you need to dissolve concrete, this theory is incredibly useful because you go and buy a gallon of muriatic acid. And so this is a paradigm of truth, of constantly gathering more data and developing more and more complex versions of that explain the data and that predict the outcomes of certain phenomena. And so this is a metric of value. If you have a model of reality that is admittedly incomplete, but that does a good job of explaining the probable outcome 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10, whatever, that's a huge step up over 50-50. And the other thing I want to dive into a little bit more is, as part of this, because the underlying value of all truth is well-being. You could say the reason we want the truth about scientific data, the reason why we get upset or feel betrayed when it turns out a drug company suppressed some of the data, is that you cannot have an accurate prediction or an accurate theory and thus take intelligent action if you don't have all the facts. And so you have facts being presentations of data in predictable patterns that help us make better decisions. Better decisions for what? For sustainable human well-being. That's what we're all after. And so the question about a truth is it useful? Useful for what? Useful for creating more well-being. And this is on a continuum. For example, a Humvee, takes a gallon of gas and gives you maybe 12 miles or 15 miles for that gallon of gas of transportation. In medium range, depends on the model, in medium ranges of comfort. It gives you a lot of safety if you hit another vehicle. The other vehicle is damaged more than your own, for example. But it's not taking you a very long way for that gallon of gas. So you could say that since there's a cost to everything, that if you could get 50 miles for the same gallon of gas in a Prius, for example, that this is more intelligent. You're getting more value per unit of energy invested. And so a truth that delivers more human well-being per unit of energy invested is a useful truth. And so to the next question in this kind of hierarchy of truths, is it valuable? Is it valuable? Is whether or not it increases the well-being of those involved by its adoption. If it does, it is valuable to the people involved. And one of the most objective ways to measure value is the hierarchy of human needs. Does adopting this truth lead to behavior that increases the survival for those who adopt the truth? Increases the security of survival for those who adopt the truth? Increases the love and belonging of those who adopt the truth? The self-esteem. Does it lead to developing unique talents and potential within the individual and bringing that out to the community? Does it result in increased abundance within the community? And does it lead to moving out of the reptilian brain into the transcendent brain of thinking about something bigger than the self, bigger than the individual, and being in service to something bigger? If it does that, more than the existing truth, more than the existing paradigm, it is a step forward. It is not an end. If we fully follow the anomalous data, we will continue to challenge and expand most, if not all, of our scientific theories over the next 1,000 years. Now, scientists are as bigoted as religious priests or any other priest and love to pretend that they've arrived, that this is never going to change. But whether it's discussing why margarine is better than butter and then now butter better than margarine, or whether pasteurized milk and now whole milk, or whether it was, cannabis is the scourge of the earth and now it's the great medicine, whatever it is, the truths that are most useful are more nuanced and more complex and lead to more nuanced and effective ways of responding, such as if you're trying to pass a mathematical exam, smoking marijuana is probably not a good idea. If you've got rheumatoid arthritis, rubbing THC salve on your joints works for a lot of people. And so you want a more and more complex and nuanced version of things where the dose, where the context, where the purpose, the goal, where it's all taken into account, where the temperament of the individual. It's not one style of education gets crammed down everyone's throat. That's a very low level of intelligence, a very low level of truth. It's about gathering more and more data about well-being. Well-being in the context of human needs, well-being in the context of human preference, and well-being in the context of survival and sustainability over time. Each of these is an expanded definition of well-being over hedonistic pleasure in the moment.